My daughter, Evelyn, said a retired history professor would be an embarrassment at her high society Boston wedding, so she banned me after taking my $40,000. But when I walked into that grand ballroom, the city's elite were stunned and she dropped her champagne glass. Her public shame was just getting started. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The chair, a delicate piece of furniture that seemed more for show than for comfort, creaked under my weight. I shifted, my tweed jacket feeling a bit too warm inside the polished atmosphere of the Beacon Hill Cafe. 2:15 in the afternoon. Evelyn was never late, a trait she thankfully inherited from her mother and not from me. The delay meant the news was significant. Around me, the low hum of Boston's old money filled the space. Conversations about summering on the vineyard and charity galas floated over the clinking of porcelain cups. It wasn't my world. My world was dusty lecture halls and the quiet solitude of my study in Cambridge, surrounded by books that smelled of history and home. But Evelyn had chosen this place, a clear symbol of the life she was building for herself, and for that I was endlessly proud. My black coffee had long since gone cold. Then the bell above the door chimed, and she swept in. My daughter Evelyn. She navigated the maze of small tables with a practiced grace, her cashmere coat draped perfectly over her shoulders. Her smile, when it found me, was radiant enough to eclipse the dreary autumn afternoon outside. Something on her left hand caught the light, a brilliant, star-like flash. "Dad," she said, her voice bright as she slid into the chair opposite me, "I have the most incredible news." I leaned forward, my own smile feeling too large for my face. The years just melted away, and for a moment, she was again the 7-year-old girl showing me a drawing she'd made in class. "Sweetheart, what is it? You look like you're about to burst." She thrust her hand across the table, the diamond on her finger a testament to a world of success I had only read about. Robert proposed. My heart swelled, a warm tide of pure joy. "Evelyn, that's wonderful. Truly wonderful." I reached for her hand, my larger, worn fingers gently closing around hers, careful of the magnificent ring. Robert. I'd only met the young man twice. A junior partner at a prestigious law firm downtown, impeccably polite, with a handshake as firm as his ambition. He made my daughter happy. That was all the endorsement I ever needed. "Tell me everything," I urged. "When? How did it happen?" Her excitement was infectious, a beautiful firework display of emotion. "Last night, at the public garden, right by the swan boats. He had a string quartet playing, Dad. It was like something out of a movie. A thoughtful young man indeed. It was more than I could have hoped for. The pride in my chest felt like a physical presence, warm and expansive. My little girl, the one I'd taught to ride a bicycle and helped with her history papers, was starting her new life. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. So incredibly happy." Ugh. She squeezed my hand, her eyes sparkling with plans and possibilities. "And that's not even the best part, Dad. We're already planning everything. It's going to be the most perfect, beautiful wedding." "Perfect is the right word for it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I took a sip of my cold coffee, but barely registered the taste. "Whatever you want, sweetheart. Whatever makes you happy." Her face lit up, and she leaned across the table, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a grand secret. "We've already looked at the Chilton Club. It's exclusive, historic. Robert's mother is a member, which helps. 150 guests, Dad. Can you imagine? A string quartet for the ceremony, a proper jazz band for the reception, white roses everywhere." She painted a vivid picture, a tapestry woven from silk, music, and social prestige. I, a man who had spent his life chronicling the past, could appreciate the importance of tradition and ceremony. But the scale of it, 150 people, it was more than the attendance at most of the academic conferences I had keynoted. I must have blinked, a flicker of surprise passing over my face. She noticed it immediately. "I know it sounds like a lot," she said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more careful. "But this is it, Dad. My one day, and with Robert's family. Everything has to be flawless. You understand." I did, of course. Or at least, I tried to. I understood that her world now had different rules, a different currency of expectations. All that matters is your happiness. I repeated my personal mantra for the afternoon. And it all adds up, she continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her untouched teacup. The venue, the catering, the flowers. We're talking about an event that will cost around $40,000. The number hung in the air between us, stark and heavy. $40,000. It was more than the advance I had received for my last book, the product of 5 years of research. It was a significant portion of the retirement savings Helen and I had so carefully accumulated for a single day. A rational part of my brain, the historian's part, noted the figure with detached astonishment, but the father in me silenced it immediately. This was for Evelyn, for her one perfect day. Before I had even fully processed the amount, the words were already leaving my lips. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll take care of it." Her relief was palpable, a visible softening of her entire posture. Her smile, which had been bright but brittle, now seemed genuine. "Really, Dad? You mean it?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," I said, and it was the truth. "It's my daughter's wedding day. It's an honor." "Thank you, Daddy." She hadn't called me that in years. The word was a key, unlocking a vault of memories and affection so deep that $40,000 suddenly seemed like a trivial sum. "You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," I said, standing up and reaching for my wallet to pay the bill. The conversation felt complete, a promise made and accepted. She stood as well, gathering her purse. "This is amazing. I'll come by the house to pick up the check. How about Thursday morning? Around 10? I have a meeting downtown at 11:30, so I can stop by on my way." "Thursday at 10 is perfect," I said, walking her toward the door. The efficiency of it was slightly jarring, but I chalked it up to her busy, important life. Outside on the brisk Boston street, I gave her a hug, breathing in the scent of her expensive perfume. For a moment, I held my little girl. Then she pulled away, smiled one last time, and disappeared into the flow of the city. Thursday morning arrived with a soft gray light filtering through the tall windows of my study. I had spent 3 days in a state of quiet bliss, preparing the house as if for a royal visit. Fresh flowers sat in a vase Helen had loved, and the scent of lemon polish hung faintly in the air. On my mahogany desk, the checkbook lay open. $40,000. I wrote the amount with the same precision I used for academic footnotes, my hand steady. This was not an expenditure. It was an investment in my daughter's happiness. Just as I was signing my name, the phone rang. It was Catherine, Helen's younger sister. "Frank? I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Never, Catherine. It's good to hear your voice." "I spoke with Evelyn yesterday," she said, her tone hesitant. "She told me about the engagement, and about your generous contribution." There was a pause. "Frank, are you sure about this? She sounds different, so focused on things." I felt a familiar prickle of defensiveness. Catherine had always been more wary of Evelyn's ambition. "She's excited, that's all. She's marrying into a prominent family. It's natural she wants everything to be right." Just be careful, Frank," she said softly. "Your heart is bigger than your wallet. I just don't want to see her take both." I ended the call, a slight unease settling over me, but it vanished the moment Evelyn's BMW pulled into the driveway. At exactly 10 o'clock, punctual as ever. She entered without ceremony, already checking the watch on her slender wrist. "Hi, Dad. Sorry, I can't stay long. Meeting at 11:30. "No problem at all, sweetheart. I have it right here." I gestured toward the desk. She walked over, her eyes immediately finding the check. I held it out to her. She took it, her fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second, and the casualness of the gesture stung more than I expected. She glanced at the number, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her designer handbag. The entire transaction took less than 30 seconds. "Well," I said, trying to fill the sudden, awkward silence, "I cannot wait to see you walk down that aisle. My beautiful daughter." Evelyn looked up from her purse. Her expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "Actually, Dad, there's something else." "Anything?" I said, my heart still full. "You won't be at the wedding." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. What? What do you mean? I mean, you're not invited, she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice she might use to cancel a magazine subscription. It's better if you're not there. I gripped the back of my leather chair, the room tilting slightly. Evelyn, I don't understand. Why wouldn't I be at my own daughter's wedding? She finally looked at me, her gaze sweeping over my worn sweater, my comfortable but unfashionable trousers, my entire existence as a retired academic. Because, she said, the word as sharp and cold as a shard of glass, a dusty old professor would be an embarrassment. You would ruin the image. I can't have you making me look bad in front of Robert's family. She turned and walked toward the door. I followed, stumbling, my mind unable to form a coherent thought. Evelyn, please. She opened the front door, letting in a rush of cold air. Just forget about the wedding, Dad. Pretend it isn't happening. She walked down the steps without looking back. I stood in the doorway, clutching the frame for support, until her car disappeared around the corner. The sound of its engine faded, leaving only a profound, deafening silence that filled my house and my heart. For 2 days, the silence in my Cambridge house was a living entity. It followed me from room to room, amplifying the echo of Evelyn's words. An embarrassment. The phrase had embedded itself in my mind, a cruel splinter of ice. I moved through the motions of living, making coffee I didn't drink, opening books I didn't read. Sleep offered no escape. Only fragmented dreams of her walking away, the sound of her car engine, a final dismissive punctuation mark. On the third morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, and, for the first time, I didn't look away. I forced myself to see what she saw. Catherine was right. My heart had been too open. In the years since Helen's passing, a slow decline had taken hold, a quiet surrender I hadn't even acknowledged. My shoulders stooped with a weariness that had nothing to do with age. My favorite sweater, once a comfortable fit, was now stretched tight across my middle. I saw the physical manifestation of grief and loneliness. I saw a man who had stopped fighting for himself. There was a kernel of truth in her cruelty, and that was the part that hurt the most. But as I stood there, staring at the stranger in the mirror, something else began to stir beneath the layers of pain. It was not the fiery rage of a shouting match, but something colder, heavier. It was the quiet, unyielding anger of a historian who sees a narrative being deliberately corrupted. My story was not finished, and I would not let her write the final, dismissive chapter. I walked into my study, the heart of my home, and sat down at the desk where I had signed away a small fortune for a daughter's love. The desktop background on my computer was a photo of Evelyn and me at her college graduation, both of us beaming. My finger hovered over the mouse for a long moment. Then, with a decisive click, I moved the image to the trash bin. It was not an act of hate, but of amputation. I was cutting away the part of me that accepted disrespect in the name of affection. The screen was now a blank, neutral blue, an empty canvas. My fingers, which had once typed out lectures on the rise and fall of empires, now moved with a new purpose. I opened a web browser. The search terms were simple, direct. Best personal trainers, Boston. Men's stylists, Beacon Hill. Advanced nutrition plans for men over 60. For hours I researched. I compiled a list, created a spreadsheet, and outlined a 3-month campaign with the same meticulous detail I had once used for a doctoral thesis. The objective was clear, a complete and total transformation. This would not be a half-hearted attempt to lose a few pounds. This would be a resurrection. By late afternoon, the plan was complete. The wedding was on June 22nd. 12 weeks. 84 days. Each day was a line item in my new budget of self-respect. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my study, I picked up the phone. My finger paused over the number of a high-end fitness club I had found, one known for producing dramatic results. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling calm. Revolution Fitness, this is Marcus. The voice on the other end was young, energetic. I took a breath, my own voice steady and clear, unrecognizable even to myself. Hello, I said. I have an important event in 3 months. I need to completely transform myself. The alarm screamed at 5:30 in the morning, a brutal summons to a world I hadn't willingly inhabited in 30 years. I pulled on the new workout clothes I'd bought the day before, black athletic shorts, and a gray shirt made of some synthetic moisture-wicking material that felt alien against my skin. In the bathroom mirror, I looked less like a man beginning a transformation, and more like a history professor playing a bizarre role for which he was entirely miscast. Revolution Fitness was located in the Seaport District, a gleaming temple of glass and steel. The smell hit me the moment I walked in, a sterile fusion of rubber, metal, and the faint, sharp scent of human sweat. Machines I couldn't name were arranged in disciplined rows, looking like instruments of sophisticated torture. Young, impossibly fit people moved between them with an easy confidence, their bodies seemingly designed for this environment. I felt like a dusty manuscript in a digital library. A young man named Marcus, the same one I'd spoken to on the phone, greeted me with a clipboard and a professionally warm smile. "Frank, glad you could make it. Ready to begin your revolution?" I managed a curt nod, my throat too dry for words. "Let's start with an assessment," he said, leading me to a series of machines that measured things I preferred not to know. Weight, 265 pounds. The number, spoken aloud in this temple of physical perfection, felt like a judgment. "Target weight?" Marcus asked, pen poised. "Whatever makes me look like I deserve respect," I said, the words rougher than I intended. He paused, looking at me with a new curiosity. "Okay, let's aim for 2 to 10, 55 pounds. It's aggressive, but doable. This is going to hurt, Frank. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," I lied. We started on the treadmill. I, who had once walked the battlefields of Europe for my research, could barely manage 8 minutes at a brisk walking pace before my lungs burned and sweat blinded me. All around me, others ran effortlessly, their synchronized movements a silent mockery of my struggle. The weight machines were worse. Marcus guided me through basic movements that should have been simple, but my body refused to cooperate. Muscles I had long forgotten existed screamed in protest. Every repetition was a negotiation between my determination and my body's deep-seated desire to quit. He was patient, correcting my form, adjusting the weights, his professionalism a stark contrast to my flailing ineptitude. An hour later, I was sitting on a bench in the locker room, every fiber of my being trembling with an exhaustion so profound it felt like an illness. My reflection in the mirror was a portrait of defeat, red-faced, drenched, the new gray shirt clinging to my belly. An embarrassment. Evelyn's word echoed in the sudden quiet. But as I stared, something else flickered in that reflection. A spark. It was the defiant glint of a man who had been knocked down but was not yet knocked out. Every agonizing minute on that treadmill had been a refutation of her judgment. Every weight I'd struggled to lift was a brick in the foundation of a new man. As I gathered my things, my legs feeling like jelly, Marcus found me. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. I looked at him, my voice steadier than I felt. "Same time, every day." He grinned. "That's the spirit. See you tomorrow, Frank." Walking to my car in the crisp morning air, my body ached with a pain I hadn't felt in decades. But for the first time in a long time, my spine felt straight. The first step had been taken. There were only 83 more to go. A month had passed. 30 days of pre-dawn alarms, aching muscles, and the bland taste of grilled chicken and steamed broccoli. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a monotonous, grinding reality. The progress was slow, measured in single pounds and extra seconds on the treadmill. Today, that progress felt like a distant memory. I was attempting to run through Boston Common, but my body had staged a full-scale rebellion. My lungs were on fire, each breath a ragged gasp, and my legs felt like lead. I collapsed onto a park bench overlooking the pond, defeated. The optimistic spark I'd felt a month ago was gone, extinguished by sheer, unrelenting exhaustion. I was a fool. A 65-year-old man trying to turn back time out of spite. It was hopeless. "Frank? Frank Miller? Is that you?" The voice cut through my haze of self-pity. I looked up to see George Henderson, my neighbor and a man I'd served with decades ago, walking his beagle. His posture was still military straight, a stark contrast to my own slumped form. "George," I managed, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. He studied me, his eyes missing nothing. "You've lost weight. Quite a bit, actually. But you look like you've just gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight." The kindness in his voice, the simple act of being seen by someone who knew me, cracked the dam of my resolve. The words spilled out before I could stop them. "I can't do this anymore, George. It's too hard." He sat beside me on the bench, the beagle settling patiently at his feet. "Too hard to do what? Get in shape?" "All of it." I gestured vaguely at my sweat, soaked clothes, at the city around us. "Trying to become someone I'm not." George was quiet for a long moment. "This isn't like you, Frank. The man I remember from our army days didn't know how to quit." "That was a different lifetime," I said bitterly. "We were young then." "We were scared kids who learned to push through," he corrected gently. "What's really driving this? This isn't just a midlife crisis, 30 years too late." I stared out at the water, the words catching in my throat like gravel. "Evelyn. She's getting married in 2 months." The story came out in broken pieces. The $40,000 check, her cruel dismissal, the word embarrassment. George listened without interruption. When I finished, the muscle in his jaw was tight. "She said that. Your own daughter." He shook his head slowly. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "She took the money and told me I wasn't welcome." "Then prove her wrong," George said, his voice quiet but fierce. "But not for her, Frank. For you. I don't know if I can." That's when he told me about his own son, who after his mother's death had called him a failure, a rigid old soldier who had driven her to an early grave. It was a story I'd never heard, a vulnerability I'd never seen in him. "It took 2 years," George said, his gaze distant. "But we rebuilt things, because I was willing to change. Not for revenge, for self-respect." He stood up and extended a hand to me. "So you need to decide. Are you doing this to prove her wrong? Or are you doing this to prove to yourself that you are right?" His question landed with the force of a revelation. Revenge was a hollow pursuit. It still made Evelyn the center of my story, but self-respect, that was about me. It was about honoring the man I had been, and the man I could still become. I took his hand and let him pull me to my feet. My legs were shaky, but my spirit felt stronger than it had in a month. We walked toward the park exit in companionable silence. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked as we parted ways. "Same time tomorrow," I confirmed. But the words had a new meaning. The fight was no longer about her. It was about me. The conversation with George had been the turning point. My motivation, now anchored in self-respect, became an unshakable foundation. The daily grind of the gym transformed from a punishment into a purpose. The weeks began to blur into a disciplined rhythm of weights, cardio, and clean eating. The man in the mirror was changing, shedding the weight of both physical and emotional neglect. 2 months after that first agonizing workout, I stepped onto the digital scale in the locker room. I had avoided it until now, measuring progress by how my clothes fit and how I felt. But today, I needed to see the number. The digits flickered and then settled. 228 pounds. 37 pounds lost. It wasn't just a number, it was a testament, a story of 84,000 sit-ups, 1,000 miles on the treadmill, and countless moments of choosing a bottle of water over a glass of wine. The change was more than just physical. A quiet confidence had started to take root. I no longer felt like an intruder at Revolution Fitness. The younger gym-goers, who had once ignored me, now offered a nod of respect. Marcus, my trainer, treated me less like a client and more like a colleague. He'd started pointing me out to new members, saying, "You want to see what dedication looks like? Look at Frank." I was no longer an embarrassment. I was an example. One evening, as I was preparing my usual Spartan dinner of baked fish and asparagus, the phone rang. It was Catherine. We hadn't spoken in weeks, a deliberate choice on my part to focus entirely on my new regimen. "Frank?" she asked, a familiar note of worry in her voice. I was getting concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is more than all right, Catherine," I replied, and the sound of my own voice surprised me. It was stronger, clearer, resonant, with a vitality that had been absent for years. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Frank, you sound different. You sound good. Really good." I feel good," I said, and the simple statement was the most profound truth I had spoken in a decade. "What's happened? What have you been doing?" "Just some spring cleaning," I said lightly. "Getting rid of things I don't need anymore. Dusting off some old habits." I could hear her start to cry softly, a sound of sheer, unadulterated relief. "Oh, Frank, I'm so happy. I was so worried after Evelyn." Her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you're taking care of yourself. Helen would be so proud." Her words were a balm, a welcome affirmation from someone who truly cared. It was one thing to earn the respect of strangers at a gym, but another entirely to hear the joy in the voice of my sister-in-law, a woman who was as close to family as I had left. The conversation was brief, but it fortified my resolve in a way no workout could. As we were about to hang up, she asked, "Have you spoken to Evelyn?" A calm settled over me, the cold, clear focus of a man with a plan. "No," I said. "Not yet, but we'll be seeing each other soon." "Oh, you're going to the wedding after all?" she asked, hope blooming in her voice. "You could say that," I replied, a slight smile touching my lips. "Don't you worry, Catherine. I know exactly what I'm doing." With less than a month until the wedding, it was time for the next phase of the plan. I drove downtown to a part of Boston I usually avoided, a street lined with heritage storefronts whose polished brass signs bore names that spoke of generations of craftsmanship. I stopped in front of a haberdashery named Crimson, a place I had walked past 1,000 times but never felt I had the right to enter. Today, I did. The bell chimed softly as I stepped inside. The air smelled of cedar, leather, and fine wool. A distinguished gentleman about my own age, with silver hair and an impeccably pressed shirt, approached me. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Crimson. I'm Robert. How may I help you?" "I need a suit," I said, my voice even. "For a special occasion." His eyes, the practiced gaze of a man who understood both fabric and people, assessed me not with judgment, but with professional appreciation. "You've come to the right place. You have an excellent build, sir." The frame of a man who takes care of himself. The simple, respectful observation landed with quiet satisfaction. "I've been working on it," I said. He led me past racks of charcoal and navy suits. "What is the occasion, if you don't mind my asking?" "My daughter's wedding," I replied, the words now feeling strategic rather than painful. "Congratulations, the father of the bride. A singular honor." He selected a charcoal gray suit with a subtle pinstripe. "Let's try this." It has a timeless authority. In the fitting room, surrounded by full-length mirrors and warm lighting, the transformation felt complete. Robert was a master of his craft, his hands moving with swift precision, pinning and adjusting the fabric. "The jacket should embrace the torso, not constrict it," he explained, smoothing the shoulders. "We want to honor the work you've put in, not hide it." When he was finished, I looked at the man in the mirror. It was not just a reflection, it was a revelation. The suit didn't just fit my new body, it fit my new sense of self. The slumped shoulders of the grieving widower were gone, replaced by the straight-backed posture of a man who knew his own worth. The hesitant glance of the academic was gone, replaced by the direct, unwavering gaze of a man with a purpose. This was not Frank Miller, the dusty old professor. This was Frank Miller, full stop. "A perfect fit," Robert declared with a satisfied nod. "When do you need it?" "The wedding is June 22nd. Plenty of time. We'll have it tailored and ready for you by the 15th. I paid for the entire ensemble, the suit, a crisp white shirt, a silk tie, and gleaming Italian leather shoes without looking at the total. Evelyn had taught me a valuable lesson about transactions. Some things were not expenses, they were investments. She had invested $40,000 in a party. I was investing a fraction of that in my own reclamation. I walked out of Crimson and back onto the Boston street, carrying the suit bag not like a purchase, but like a soldier carrying his dress uniform. The city air felt crisp, charged with possibility. Every step of my journey, every drop of sweat, every moment of doubt, every encouraging word from George had led to this. I was no longer just preparing my body. I was forging my armor. The night before the wedding was unnaturally still. A heavy calm had settled over my Cambridge neighborhood, the kind that often precedes a storm. I sat at my desk in the study, the same desk where I had signed the check that had started this entire affair. The room, once a sanctuary of academic retreat, had become my command center. My campaign, meticulously planned over 12 weeks, was entering its final phase. There would be no sleepless nights spent tossing and turning. My mind was sharp, my purpose clear. On the desk before me, I had laid out a single sheet of the heavy, cream-colored stationery Helen had loved, the kind reserved for important correspondence. Beside it lay my favorite fountain pen. My actions were deliberate, devoid of anger or haste. I was a historian preparing a primary source document, ensuring every detail was accurate for the record. At the top of the page, I wrote a single word: invoice. I drew on my decades of academic discipline, creating an itemized list. The first entry was wedding consultation services, financial provisioning, for the amount of $40,000. Below that, I added another line item. My pen paused for a moment as I considered the wording. Then, I wrote, fee for imposed emotional distress and familial exclusion. I did not assign a monetary value to that. Some debts are not counted in dollars. The work was precise, almost surgical. There was no rage left in me, only a cold, clear sense of justice. Evelyn had defined our relationship as a transaction when she took my money and discarded my presence. I was simply formalizing the terms of her contract. At the bottom of the invoice, I wrote the final, most important line. Payment terms. I wrote, my handwriting as steady as it had ever been. Respect. Due upon receipt. I reviewed the document one last time, checking for any errors. It was perfect. A concise, irrefutable summary of the debt owed. It was not a plea for love, nor an angry tirade. It was a statement of fact. Carefully, I folded the stationery and slid it into a matching cream-colored envelope. I did not seal it. This was a message that needed to be opened and understood. I placed the envelope inside the breast pocket of my new suit jacket, which hung from a valet stand in the corner of the room, ready for the morning. My preparations were complete. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street. I felt no anxiety, no fear, only the profound calm of a man who had chosen his course and was prepared to see it through to the end. I was not the grieving father seeking pity, nor the vengeful man seeking to cause pain. I was simply Frank Miller, a professor of history, about to deliver a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. The sun would be up in a few hours, and so I waited for the dawn. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June afternoon. I dressed with the slow, deliberate care of a soldier preparing his uniform. The charcoal suit fit like a second skin. The silk tie knotted perfectly. The weight of the envelope in my breast pocket felt like a medal, a tangible reminder of my purpose. As I locked the door to my quiet Cambridge house, I was no longer leaving as a victim. I was departing as an agent of consequence. The Chilton Club was nestled in a wealthy Boston suburb, an imposing brick edifice surrounded by acres of manicured green. I handed the keys to my freshly detailed truck to the valet, who took them without a second glance. In this world, confidence was the only credential that mattered, and for the first time in years, I had it in abundance. I walked toward the outdoor ceremony, where a string quartet was playing softly. Two young men in tuxedos stood at an entrance archway draped in white roses, checking names on a list. One of them looked up as I approached. "Good afternoon, sir. Here for the Miller-Hayes wedding?" "I am," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. "A beautiful day for it." "Indeed, sir. Friend of the bride or the groom?" The question hung in the air for a beat. "I'm a close relation to the family," I replied smoothly. He nodded, gesturing me through without checking his list. Why would he? I looked the part. I belonged. I found a seat in the back row, partially shaded by an old oak tree. From there I had a clear view of the altar, and then I saw her, Evelyn, walking down the aisle, alone. She was radiant, a vision in white lace. For a fleeting, painful moment, the historian, the strategist, the wronged man, all vanished, and only the father remained. My heart ached with the memory of the little girl I had once carried on my shoulders. The ceremony was elegant, impersonal, and brief. As the officiant spoke of love and fidelity, a woman seated next to me, dressed in a tasteful navy dress, leaned over. "Such a lovely ceremony," she whispered. "Breathtaking," I agreed. She continued in a low voice, "It's just so tragic about her father." The air in my lungs turned to ice. "Oh? Yes," she said, shaking her head sadly. "Richard mentioned it at the rehearsal dinner. Apparently he passed away quite suddenly, just recently. The poor girl having to walk down the aisle by herself. But she's being so brave about it." I sat perfectly still, the quartet's music washing over me without meaning. I stared at my daughter, standing at the altar, bathed in sunlight, a grieving orphan in the story she had constructed. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. She hadn't just uninvited me. She hadn't just called me an embarrassment. She had erased me from existence. She had buried me to preserve her perfect day. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that it cleared away any lingering traces of fatherly sentiment. The officiant asked if anyone had an objection. I remained silent. My objection would not be a shout, but a quiet, calculated reckoning. "You may kiss the bride," he finally announced. The guests applauded as Richard and Evelyn shared their first kiss as husband and wife. I applauded with them, my hands moving mechanically. The ceremony was over. The performance was about to begin. I moved from the ceremony grounds to the reception hall with the rest of the guests, a ghost at my own daughter's feast. I accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, the bubbles rising in the crystal glass like tiny celebratory lies. The hall was magnificent, a grand ballroom with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that dripped light onto the well-dressed crowd. The air buzzed with cheerful chatter and the smooth notes of a jazz quartet. It was the perfect picture Evelyn had paid $40,000 to paint, and I was the flaw she thought she had erased. I positioned myself near a marble column, observing. My daughter was the radiant center of this universe, laughing with her bridesmaids, accepting congratulations from Robert's distinguished-looking colleagues, glowing with the satisfaction of a flawlessly executed plan. She had no idea a historian was about to teach her that the past is never truly buried. I waited for 20 minutes, my patience absolute. I watched her move through the room, a queen in her court. Then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. Her new husband was pulled into a conversation with a group of older gentlemen, and her maid of honor excused herself to visit the powder room. For a brief, perfect instant, Evelyn stood alone near the towering wedding cake. I set my untouched champagne flute down on a tray. My movements were unhurried, my path through the crowd direct. A few people glanced at me, a well-dressed stranger moving with purpose, and then looked away. I was invisible, just another face in the sea of Boston's elite. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was quiet, yet it cut through the ambient noise. Evelyn turned, a practiced, polite smile already on her lips, ready to greet another guest. The smile froze. Her eyes, the same warm brown as her mother's, scanned my face. I could see the flicker of confusion, the mental gears turning as her brain tried to process the impossible. She saw a man who was familiar, the set of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, but the context was all wrong. This man was fit, straight-backed, dressed in a suit that cost more than her father's monthly pension. This man did not fit the description of the dusty old professor she had dismissed. Then, recognition dawned. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a violent, instantaneous shock, as if she had touched a live wire. Her face drained of all color. The hand holding the champagne flute went slack, her nervous system momentarily short-circuiting. The crystal flute slipped from her fingers. Time seemed to slow as it fell, tumbling end over end, before striking the marble floor with a sound that was shockingly loud in the opulent room. It was not a clatter, it was a sharp, explosive shatter. A sudden, spreading silence rippled out from where we stood. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The jazz quartet hesitated, a saxophone note dying midair. 150 pairs of eyes fixed on the bride, her white dress now speckled with champagne, and on the mysterious, calm stranger standing before her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at me as if I were an apparition, a ghost summoned from a guilty conscience. "Dad?" The word was a choked whisper, a question mark of pure terror. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Hello, Evelyn," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Beautiful wedding." Robert was at her side in an instant, his face a mask of concern. "Evelyn, darling, are you all right? What happened?" He glanced from her pale face to the shattered glass, then to me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Who is this gentleman?" Evelyn seemed to snap back to life. A masterful actress. She quickly rearranged her features from terror into a shaky, brilliant smile. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the fabric of my suit like talons. "Dad! Oh my goodness, Dad, you made it! I can't believe it!" Her performance was flawless. She turned to her new husband, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of joyful surprise. "Robert, darling, this is my father, Frank Miller. I told you about him. He's been unwell. I didn't think he'd be able to come. This is the best surprise of my life." Robert's confusion eased, replaced by a welcoming smile. He extended his hand. "Mr. Miller, it's an honor, sir. Evelyn has told me so much about you." The poor man had no idea which version of the story he was supposed to believe, but he was choosing the path of least resistance. "Please, call me Frank," I said, accepting his firm handshake. "I'm so glad you're here," Evelyn gushed, clinging to my arm. "I was wrong before, so wrong. Stress makes people say terrible things. But you're here now, looking so handsome. You must stay. You must be a part of this." Her voice was a desperate, hurried plea, disguised as an invitation. The immediate crisis had been averted. The nearby guests, seeing the bride embrace the stranger, began to turn back to their own conversations. "Of course I'm here," I said, patting her hand gently. "What kind of father would I be if I didn't bring my daughter a proper wedding gift?" Her eyes brightened, seeing a path back to normalcy. "Oh, Dad, you didn't have to. Having you here is the only gift I need." "Nonsense," I said, my voice warm but my eyes cold. I reached into my breast pocket and withdrew the cream-colored envelope. I held it toward her with both hands, just as I had once presented her with birthday cards as a child. Every bride deserves something special from her father. She took it, her smile wide and relieved. She was winning. The ghost had been welcomed, the crisis contained. Her perfect day was back on track. "You're too sweet, Dad. I can't wait to see what it is." Her fingers, still trembling slightly, worked at the unsealed flap. She pulled out the heavy stationery. The smile froze on her face as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the page. I watched the sequence of emotions play out in high definition. Confusion, as she read the word invoice. Disbelief, as she saw the itemized lines. And finally, a wave of crimson fury as her gaze fell upon the total amount and the final damning payment term. For a long moment she just stared at the paper, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a ghastly white that clashed with her wedding dress. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and panic. Her voice was a venomous whisper, barely audible. "What is this? This has to be a joke." I leaned in slightly, my own voice pleasant, yet carrying just enough to be heard by the couple at the next table. "I'm afraid not. You see, when you established our relationship as a business transaction, I decided to provide you with the appropriate paperwork." Evelyn crumpled the invoice in her fist, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "This is my wedding day. You are trying to humiliate me in front of everyone." "Humiliate you?" I asked, my voice still quiet. I adjusted my cufflinks, a gesture I had practiced until it felt natural. "My dear daughter, you accomplished that for yourself 3 months ago. I am simply returning the favor." The conversation at the surrounding tables had now completely died away. A perimeter of silent, curious guests had formed around our small island of family drama. The jazz quartet had fallen silent. The photographer was discreetly repositioning himself, sensing this was the true main event. Robert stepped between us, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, Let's all just calm down. This is clearly a misunderstanding we can sort out privately. Um, there is no misunderstanding, Evelyn snapped, waving the crumpled paper. He's trying to ruin everything. I looked past her, my gaze settling on the microphone stand on the small stage where the band had been playing. It stood there, silver and waiting, like a sword in a stone. It was time. Sir, please, Robert began, seeing where I was looking. Whatever this isn't the place. On the contrary, I said, gently but firmly moving past him. This is exactly the place. End of. I walked to the stage, each step measured and deliberate. I could hear Evelyn's frantic whisper behind me. Dad, no, please, stop. I took the microphone from its stand. It felt solid and real in my hand. I tapped it twice. The sharp thump-thump echoed through the grand ballroom, a sound as commanding as a judge's gavel. 150 conversations stopped. 150 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, calm and professorial. Thank you for your attention. If I may have a moment, I'd like to say a few words about my daughter, the bride. A murmur of polite interest went through the crowd. This, they assumed, was the traditional, heartwarming father of the bride toast. 3 months ago, I continued, Evelyn came to me with the wonderful news of her engagement. She described to me the wedding of her dreams, this beautiful event you are all enjoying today. She asked me for $40,000 to make it possible, and because I love my daughter, I gave her every penny without hesitation. Nods of approval rippled through the audience. I let the warmth of that sentiment settle for a moment before continuing, my tone shifting slightly, layering in the weight of the truth. After she had my check safely in her purse, she told me something else. She told me that I was too much of an embarrassment to attend this wedding, that a dusty old professor would ruin her image in front of all of you important people. The change in the room was electric. Gasps were audible. I saw hands fly to mouths, eyes widen in shock. The polite smiles vanished, replaced by expressions of disbelief and horror. But the story doesn't end there, I said, my voice unwavering. Because rather than simply exclude me, my daughter found a more convenient solution. She told her new husband, his family, and all of her friends that her embarrassing old father had recently passed away. A collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom. The murmurs were now loud, angry. I saw guests turning to stare at Evelyn, who stood frozen by the cake, her face a mask of utter ruin. But as you can see, I concluded, gesturing to my transformed appearance, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. I am alive, I am well, and I am 37 pounds lighter than the man she was ashamed of. I am here today not as a ghost, but as a father delivering his wedding gift. The best gift, sometimes, is a lesson in consequences, and a reminder that respect is not something you take, it is something you earn. I placed the microphone back in its stand. A profound silence hung in the air for 3 long seconds. Then, from a table in the front, an elderly woman began to clap. Another joined her, then another, and within moments, the entire room erupted in a wave of thunderous, sustained applause. But it wasn't for the bride, it was for me. The applause followed me as I stepped away from the microphone, growing stronger rather than fading. I didn't look at Evelyn. My message had been delivered to her, but this moment of affirmation was for me. It was the sound of 150 strangers, validating a truth I had fought for 3 months to reclaim. I turned to walk toward the grand exit doors, my head held high. Before I had taken 3 steps, a distinguished, silver-haired man stepped into my path, extending his hand. "Sir," he said, his voice firm with conviction, "Robert Chen, I'm a partner in Richard's firm. I have to say, that was the bravest speech I have ever witnessed. Your dedication is an inspiration." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Chen," I replied, accepting his firm handshake. "I simply believe in the importance of historical accuracy." He winced sympathetically. "Family can be complex. But what you've shown here today, standing up for yourself with such dignity, that's a rare quality." More guests were approaching now, forming a small, respectful procession. The woman in the navy dress who had told me of my own demise touched my arm, her eyes bright with admiration. "You are an extraordinary man," she said. "Your late wife would have been immensely proud." From across the room I saw them. George stood near the back, a proud, satisfied grin on his face. Beside him was Catherine, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, her tears no longer of worry, but of pride. They both gave me a small, sharp nod. It was the only validation I truly needed, but the support of these strangers was a welcome balm. My gaze drifted one last time toward the head table. The celebration had transformed into a wake. Evelyn sat alone, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Robert stood beside her, rubbing her back, but his expression was distant, his eyes scanning the faces of his guests, his partners, his family, all of whom were now looking at his new bride with a mixture of pity and contempt. Her perfect day had crumbled into a permanent stain on her reputation. Robert's eyes met mine across the ballroom. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not an apology, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, an admission of a truth he could no longer ignore. I had done what I came to do. There was nothing more to say, no victory to gloat over. The consequences would unfold in their own time. The small crowd parted respectfully as I continued my walk toward the exit. I moved through the room not as an intruder, but as a man who had earned his place. The whispers that followed me now were not of scandal, but of respect. As I reached the grand doors, I paused and looked back one final time. Evelyn had lifted her head. Our eyes met. In hers I saw not hatred, but a devastating cocktail of humiliation and, for the first time, a flicker of understanding. I gave her a single neutral nod. It was not a gesture of forgiveness nor of condemnation. It was simply closure. Then I turned and walked out into the warm Boston evening, leaving the ruins of her perfect wedding behind me. The heavy doors swung shut, muffling the sound of my applause, and I was finally free. I drove through the familiar streets of Boston, the city lights painting soft streaks across my windshield. There was no elation, no triumphant surge of adrenaline from the battle won. Instead, a profound and quiet peace settled over me, the kind a historian feels when a long, complex chapter of the past finally clicks into place, its lessons clear and understood. The goal had never truly been revenge. George had helped me see that. Revenge would have been a bitter, fleeting victory. What I had fought for was something far more fundamental. It was the reclamation of my own narrative. My daughter had tried to write me out of her story, first as an embarrassment, then as a ghost. But I was the author of my own life, and tonight, I had simply written a new, definitive ending to that particular chapter. Pulling into my driveway in Cambridge, I saw the house was dark, save for the single lamp I had left on in the study. It looked the same as it had for the past 10 years, but I was returning to it as a different man. I walked through the front door, the silence that greeted me no longer feeling like loneliness, but like tranquility. I loosened my tie and walked down the hallway to the mirror that had once been my accuser. I stopped and looked at my reflection. The man who stared back was 65 years old. He had gray hair and the lines of age etched around his eyes. But his shoulders were straight. His gaze was clear. He was not an embarrassment. He was not a ghost. He was simply a man who respected himself. I gave him a slow nod of approval. My journey had started with a $40,000 check, a sum meant to buy a daughter's perfect day. But it had ended with an investment in myself that was priceless. Evelyn had wanted a flawless wedding, a perfect image to present to the world. In the end, I had given her something far more valuable, a hard lesson in the true currency of life. It isn't measured in dollars or social standing, but in dignity, in respect, and in the courage to demand the treatment you deserve. Transformation is possible at any age, and it rarely begins in a gym or a tailor's shop. It begins in the quiet, resolute moment you decide that your own self-worth is non-negotiable. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We would love to read your thoughts on Frank's journey in the comments below. And to listen to another story, please click on the video that appears on your screen. Thank you for watching. What a journey Frank has taken us on. His story serves as a powerful reminder that our value is not determined by others, but by the standards we set for ourselves. So often in life, especially as we get older, we can feel overlooked or dismissed. But Frank's transformation shows us that it is never too late to reclaim our narrative. True respect isn't given freely. It is earned through character, consistency, and the quiet courage to demand our own dignity. His story asks us a profound question. When faced with disrespect, do we shrink or do we rebuild ourselves into someone who simply cannot be ignored? We felt the sting of his daughter's betrayal, we witnessed the lonely struggle in the gym, and we held our breath as he walked into that ballroom. The man who emerged was not just thinner or better dressed, he was whole again. He found peace not in revenge, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing his own worth. That is a victory of the spirit, and it's a victory we can all aspire to in our own lives. If Frank's story of resilience and dignity resonated with you, we would be honored if you shared your own thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Your stories build a community of strength and wisdom. Please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for being with us today. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.